Listen to that. Those bearings are shot. And look at the side-to-side slop. They're in a bad way. They need replacing. But look at that. It's a perfectly smooth tube right through. How are you supposed to get them out? So these modern hubs, it looks like it's impossible to get the bearings out. But bike mechanics manage it. How do they do that? Well, stick around and I'll show you. Bicycle wheel bearings used to be a very basic affair known as cup and cone. You could maintain them with a couple of spanners and some axle grease, but you needed to look after them a lot more than your modern stuff, and it didn't perform as well as modern stuff. Modern cartridge bearings, in comparison, will run for thousands upon thousands of miles with little to no maintenance and usually run a lot faster. But the problem with a modern cartridge bearing is it's an awkward thing to work with. If you look at a modern bike hub like this, it looks like it's a non-serviceable thing. There's a metal tube running right through and there's no way that you can extract the bearings. And so the question does lie, why would you put a metal tube running right through it that stops you getting the bearings out? Well, there's a very good explanation for that, and I'll explain. In order to give you a better idea of what's going on here, but more importantly, demonstrate the role that the preload tube is playing, I've removed the inner workings from the hub and reinstalled them back onto the fork. So what you can see here is through axle, there's your dust cap, your bearing, the other bearing, and the other dust cap. Now, the problem with a cartridge bearing like this is it will only handle a load from one direction. You apply a load from the top or the bottom, it will work absolutely fine. The problem is, if you apply a load from the side, the bearing will fail prematurely. And the problem with either the traditional old quick release or the modern through axle is it is doing exactly that, and I can demonstrate that now. So if we get a digital caliper and we measure the distance between those two bearings, give or take a bit, we've got roughly 54 mil. But without the preload tube in place, what happens when we start to do our wheel up? Watch the number. You can see it's going down very quickly, and you can also see I'm not exactly applying a great deal of pressure, and it doesn't take long until that number begins with a 4. So let's try doing that again, but with the preload tube in place. So there we are, look, we're back as we were, but I've now added the preload tube, which is sat between the two inner sleeves of the bearing. And as we can see, once again, we've got roughly 54, but let's now do that up. The number's not going down, and it's now tight. So I can now get that and do that up tight. The outer dust caps are nice and tight, as is the preload tube, but those bearings are running perfectly freely. And that is why you need a preload tube. So it would seem like the preload tube is doing a fantastic job at protecting the bearing, but it's also doing an equally fantastic job of stopping us from being able to extract it. However, all is not lost. If you look closely at one of these types of cartridge bearings, you will see that it's got an internal chamfered edge. And it is that edge that allows us to extract the bearing. Let me explain. You remove cartridge bearings installed this way using a wonderful tool called a blind bearing puller. And what this does is it takes advantage of that chamfered edge and allows you to hook onto the back of the bearing and extract it out. Now, a cycling specific tool like this will cost you roughly £400. And you know what? If you run a bike shop, that's absolutely fine. However, if you are a budding home mechanic, then that price tag is a little hard to swallow. This set is a non-cycling specific generic blind bearing puller that will extract bearings from as little as 8mm right up to 25mm and will cost you roughly £30. Link in the description below. Right, how do you use it? The blind bearing puller is made up of three things: varying sizes of collets depending on which size bearing you wish to extract, a drive pin that goes into the back of the collet to open that collet out so it grabs hold of the back of the bearing, and then the puller that draws the whole lot out. Right, let's give it a go. The puller is a very simple tool to use. Select a collet that best suits the bearing size that you're extracting and put the pin in the back of it. And all you're doing is inserting it in so it hooks on to the back of the bearing. The only thing you need to be careful with here is you do not damage that preload tube. So as you can see, mine is still wobbling about. So it's not doing any damage and it's not pressing against anything. If you want, you can grab your spanners and pinch it up a little bit. But my advice there is don't go mad and just think about it needs to stay loose like that. And then all you do is you put your tool on. I've put some little felt feet on mine so it doesn't damage hubs. And you just put it on like that. And then you screw it in like so. And then you just put your tools on. In my case, a 14mm spanner. And let's do it that way around. It will make life easier. And an Allen key. And then all I need to do is turn this and it will draw the bearing out. There you go, simple as that. Oh, and there's our preload tube. And now I'll just flip the wheel over and extract the other one out the other side. So there you go, that was the blind bearing puller. What a wonderful tool it is. And considering the price of it and the amount of money we normally spend in our sport, if you're looking after a few bikes, it's a no-brainer. Anyway, we'll leave that there. Right, okay, so once you've extracted your bearings, the next obvious question is, what size are the bearings I've extracted so I can buy some new ones? And there are three simple ways to find that out. First of all, the obvious one, go to the manufacturer's website and see what it says on there. Second of all, if your bearing hasn't completely self-destructed and you look at the seal around the edge, you usually find the number written there, as it is with this one. Or a third way, and if you go into your local bike shop, what they'll normally do is they'll pull out the trusty digital caliper and they will measure it, and they will go, right, okay, it's 15 on the inside, it's 28 on the outside, and it's 7 fat. So therefore, it's a 6902. But then again, I knew that because it's written on the seal there. Now, when it comes down to what bearings to choose, you know, the King of the Mountain ship sailed for me a long time ago, so I'm not tearing around the valley like a nutter. So I'm quite happy with a good quality steel bearing. If your bike came with a set of budget wheels, then the chances are that you are running a budget bearing, and you can pick those up online for roughly £1 a bearing. I'll stick you a link below where you can pick some bearings up. Yes, there is the conversation around, you know, enduro bearings, NTM bearings, ceramic bearings. You know what, I'm not getting involved in it. Right, so once you've got your bearings, you then need to get them back in the wheel, and how do you do that? And the first obvious job, I know it's an obvious thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, make sure you thoroughly clean the inside of your hub. Get all that old grease and snot out. Right. Another top tip, get the old bearings and put them to one side. I have done it before. I have not been paying attention and driven the old bearings in. So, grease. I recommend two. I either use the Park Tool PPL1 or the Fenwicks General Assembly grease. Both are as good as each other. An application, you can either squirt it out the little tubes. This is a great little gadget for these smaller delicate jobs, the little Park Tool grease gun thing. I'll link a description below. Another great tip for you is use these, vets use these to, you know, to feed animals and stuff, big syringes, and that particular one has got loads of the Fenwick grease in it. So that's another way of doing it. Okay, so I've got my bearings here. Why is there an odd amount in there? Anyway, yeah, so got my bearings, put the old ones out the way. Make sure your preload tube is in sight, because you can very, very easily forget to put that in also. No matter what bearing you go for, it's going to have a hard, steel outer body, whether it's a ceramic bearing or a steel bearing like this, that bit is going to be hardened steel. And the body of your hub is going to be a soft alloy. Because of that, you've got to drive these bearings in perfectly perpendicular to each other. If they go in at a funny angle like that, or twisted or in any way like that, if they get driven in anything but perfectly perpendicular to both the hub and themselves, then they will rip into the hub body. And then basically you've got a ruined hub. You've got a ruined hub, you've got a ruined wheel until you deal with the hub. And you really, really don't want that. I can't stress it enough. So anyone that knows anything about this job will tell you the correct way of doing this job is to use a bearing press. But if you turn to one of those well-known bicycle tool manufacturers, once again, you can expect to pay roughly £400 for a bearing press set to drive these bearings in. As mentioned previously, if you've got a bike shop, that's fine, that's great. But if you're a budding home DIYer, then you just cannot justify £400 to drive the occasional bearing into your bike. This set is perfect for the budding bike DIY. Let's just borrow that and shove that under there. There you go. Now, this is more than enough for the occasional bit of maintenance. This bike press will give you everything you need for all of those major jobs, be it your 6902s for your wheels, your bottom brackets, mountain bike, your little suspension joints into the frame, it will do that. Some of the older type headsets, it will do all of that for you. And basically what you've got is you've got the press, and then all these little circle things you can see here, these are called drifts. And how it basically works is you've got a drift specific to a bearing. So for example, we're driving in 6902 bearings, so we need the pair of 6902 drifts. And what that drift does is it fits perfectly into the bearing, a perfectly snug fit. And those two drifts go into the clamp and drive the bearings into the hub perfectly perpendicular. And let's do that now. Right, so first of all, let's just apply a bit of grease into our hubs, both sides. We're just applying a small amount of grease. All we're doing this for is just to aid installation. So a little smear of grease around there. And a little smear of grease around there. There you go, simple as that. Okay, what we'll do, just to be on the safe side, we'll grab our bearings and we'll just do a little smear of grease on there as well. That one, that's the trouble with this gun. Once it starts going, it sort of has a life of its own and it carries on going. So you just got to be a bit careful with it. You've got to watch it where you leave it, because you'll come back and it's carried on going. So the only negative to that. Right, so yeah, just smear that on like that. Yeah, there you go, like that. And there's that one. Smear the oil on. There you go. Have I got a rag to hand? There you go. Tell you what, belt and braces, the rubber seals on the preload tube. Let's just apply a bit on there as well. There you go. Right, put that out of the way. Okay, so what we then do, we get our 6902 drift, pop it on there like that. Put our 6902 bearing on, and as you can see, that is a lovely, perfect, snug fit. Okay, and then all we do is we put that in like that. Don't forget your preload tube. Put the preload tube in like that. Your other 6902 drift with your 6902 bearing on like that. And you can see straight away it's sitting perfectly perpendicular. And then all we do is we get that, spin, down it goes, and then all we do is we just twist the handles until we feel it's solid like that. And it is literally that easy. Give it a little wiggle to push the drift out. And there are your new bearings installed. As simple as that. There you go, look at that, look. What a lovely, simple job. So there you go, that's that wheel sorted and good for thousands more gravel miles. And because I had the correct tools for the job, it only took me a few minutes and only cost me a couple of pounds to sort it, which is very nice indeed. While we're on the subject of bearings, why not check out that video up there where I talk all things headsets. Should you grease it or shouldn't you grease it, or only in certain places? Or alternatively, if you fancy something a little bit different, why not check out that video down there where I play with the Nog bike alarm. A lot of fun, that one. Thanks for watching.